Meryl Streep is not simply admired. She is etched into the very fabric of cinema. Across generations, her presence has felt less like performance and more like an encounter with something uncomfortably human. With a record of 21 Academy Award nominations and 3 wins, she did not just collect honors. She altered expectations. She transformed Sophie's choice into a wound audiences still carry, proving that truth on screen could be devastating, intimate, and almost too much to endure. She never climbed the familiar ladder of Hollywood. She dismantled it and built something higher, something no one else has reached since. For decades, she was not acting in the traditional sense. She was exposing fear, regret, longing, and restraint with surgical clarity, leaving audiences stunned into silence. Yet beneath the command, the precision, and the steel discipline, there existed a fracture she rarely named. Now, at 76, when many would retreat from the noise, Meryl Streep remains standing before waters that have never fully calmed. Her story is not one of ease. It is one of endurance, long before statues and standing ovations. Before her image became inseparable from excellence, she was a quiet child with thick glasses concealing brilliance behind reserve. In a world that rewarded sparkle and volume, she learned early how to vanish without leaving the room. She was not the girl who dominated attention, nor the one whose beauty spoke first. She lived on the margins, watching carefully, listening deeply, absorbing everything while quietly convincing herself she did not belong. Born in 1949 in Summit, New Jersey, into material stability, her inner world developed along a harsher divide. Her father, disciplined and exacting, demanded order. Her mother, an artist with unrestrained spirit, promised limitless possibility. Pulled between perfection and freedom, containment and expansion, she learned that such pressure does not always strengthen a child. Sometimes it splits them. Somewhere in that silence, a young girl began to lose her sense of self long before the world ever learned her name. At school, she was not tormented, but she was unseen. An invisibility, she discovered, could be its own survival strategy. While others were praised for confidence and shine, she faded into the background. Later, she would admit she never believed herself beautiful, never felt she belonged. When classmates crowned her prom queen, the applause felt strangely cruel. Alone afterward, staring into a mirror at a borrowed crown, she could not recognize the girl they had chosen. To be selected yet unknown, admired yet misunderstood. That contradiction followed her into adulthood, into fame, into the unrelenting days of the camera. At 12, she began formal opera training under Estelle labeling. Her voice was powerful, disciplined, and technically impressive. Yet something felt wrong. In the stillness after lessons, she sensed the dissonance settle in her chest. Years later, she would recall that moment with painful clarity, realizing she was singing something she did not feel. It was her first understanding of what it meant to lie on stage. She walked away, not from music, but from falsehood, vowing never to perform without truth, even when truth demanded pain. Even as a teenager, admired and included, she carried loneliness like an invisible scar. She did not pursue popularity. She studied it. She watched how confidence could be rehearsed, how fear hid behind smiles, how silence often spoke loudest. That inward gaze, born of isolation, became her quiet power. When you never feel like enough, she later reflected, you learn how to become anything. Acting did not arrive through hunger for applause. It arrived through necessity. Each role offered refuge, a place to exist without apology, to be heard without shouting. Long before the world would call her a chameleon, she was simply a solitary young woman searching for recognition. That ache flowed into every line she would one day speak, every tear she would shed on screen. It never disappeared. It sharpened into purpose, What audiences later called brilliance was forged not by praise, but by the heartbreak of being overlooked and learning how to transform that pain into empathy and strength. In 1971, at just 22, she entered the Yale School of Drama, a place of reverence and relentless pressure. For her, it became a furnace. Financial strain forced an unforgiving rhythm, endless productions, exhaustive rehearsals, academic demands, and side jobs that erased rest. Sleep thinned, anxiety thickened. By 1973, her body rebelled with a bleeding stomach ulcer, pain she carried through auditions and performances as though suffering itself were part of the curriculum. She later spoke of unraveling from the inside, of tears swallowed backstage, of mornings that opened not with hope but with dread. Doubt surrounded her. Classmates questioned her place there. Alone, she questioned it too. Some nights she stared at law school applications, weighing escape against identity. If this was the cost of art, she wondered whether she could afford it. What kept her was not ambition. It was survival. Acting had become the one place where chaos briefly quieted. She graduated in 1975, depleted but ignited, and moved to New York. Small apartments, smaller paychecks, off-Broadway stages that offered no glamour, only craft. Half-empty theaters and dim lights hardened her resolve. In 1976, playing Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream, a critic noticed her quiet intensity, writing that she burned slowly but completely. It was the first tremor of recognition. Rejection did not stop. She believed she lacked the beauty Hollywood demanded. Each unanswered audition felt personal. Still, she returned, building dignity without permission. The shift came in 1977 with a brief role in Julia. Minutes on screen, nothing more, yet enough to make someone pause to quietly ask who she was. What followed was not ascent by welcome, but by endurance. Her early screen work carried a gravity that could not be ignored. The Deer Hunter in 1978 revealed depths shaped by private agony. During filming, she was caring for John Cazale, the love of her life, as his health collapsed. Each scene was balanced against hospital vigils, each line weighed against the sound of his breath growing weaker. She later called that time the most beautiful and devastating of her life. The tenderness on screen was not constructed. It was lived. That performance brought her first Oscar nomination and marked her arrival as an undeniable presence. In 1979, Kramer vs. Kramer sealed it. With minimal screen time, she reshaped modern acting, offering restraint so raw it felt like exposure. Her first Academy Award followed, along with an unspoken understanding that something rare had arrived. She retreated from spectacle, declined easy glamour, guarded her private life fiercely. Fame, she believed, was merely a costume. Through the early 80s, roles arrived that demanded more truth and comfort. Then came Sophie's Choice in 1982, a role that defined her and nearly destroyed her. Learning new languages, altering herself physically and psychologically, she descended into unbearable terrain. The infamous choice Sophie is forced to make silenced entire sets. She later called it a torture of love. The second Oscar followed, along with Legend. Her greatness was never borrowed. It was paid for. Each role reopened wounds, took something in return. Sophie's Choice lingered in her body long after filming ended. Silkwood followed, then Out of Africa, each performance shaped by unresolved grief. Even later roles carried that imprint, authority masking loneliness, power shadowed by fear. Her personal life echoed those roles. The loss of John Cazale never left her. Marriage to Joan Gummer offered refuge, a way to breathe again. Together they built a quiet life, raising 4 children far from spectacle. For decades, their union appeared unbreakable, sustained by privacy and restraint. When it became known they had been separated for years, there were no explanations, only dignity. She continued forward, carrying loss without exhibition. Hollywood, meanwhile, tested her with envy and judgment. Criticism from peers, dismissals rooted in appearance, false accusations she corrected only once. She answered with silence, choosing endurance over spectacle. Now, at 76, she stands not as a relic, but as proof that greatness deepens. Her wealth, her homes, her philanthropy were never trophies. They were shields, sanctuaries, responsibilities. She lives quietly, reads constantly, chooses work with intention, mentors younger artists, and prepares a legacy grounded in empathy rather than empire. The world calls her a legend. She has always remained something rarer, a woman who endured invisibility, loss, pressure, and judgment, and still chose to give. Her true fortune is not measured in awards or estates, but in the courage to feel deeply and remain standing. Comment 76. Or write "Rip Meryl Streep" to honor them. Type yes for the next part. Her ascent did not slow after recognition arrived. If anything, the demands intensified, pressing closer to the fault lines she had carried since childhood. Fame did not erase the old loneliness. It magnified it. Every role that followed seemed to ask not only for skill, but for surrender. And she gave it again and again, with a discipline that bordered on self-ersure. In the early years of her film career. She learned quickly that success did not guarantee safety. Attention brought scrutiny. Praise invited comparison. Even as audiences leaned forward in their seats, there were voices behind closed doors measuring her against impossible standards. She listened, absorbed, and kept going. Silence had always been her armor. When Sophie's Choice arrived in 1982, it was not simply another project. It was an ordeal. She immersed herself completely, learning languages, reshaping her body, emptying herself of comfort. The role demanded that she inhabit a mother faced with an unthinkable decision, a moment so brutal it still reverberates through cinema history. On set, there were long stretches of silence after scenes ended, as if the air itself needed time to recover. Crew members wept. No one spoke. For Meryl, the damage lingered. Months after filming wrapped, the weight remained in her body. She later admitted the role broke something open inside her that never fully closed again. This was not performance in the conventional sense. It was an offering, one made with the understanding that she would not emerge unchanged. The Oscar that followed felt almost secondary to the cost. Silkwood came next, and with it another descent. Portraying Karen Silkwood meant living inside fear, suspicion, and isolation. She withdrew, spoke little, carried the character's anxiety into every quiet moment. Still grieving John Cazale, whose absence had carved a permanent hollow in her life, she poured unresolved sorrow into every glance and pause. Those close to her noticed the change. She seemed consumed, altered, as if the boundary between herself and the role had dissolved. Then came Out of Africa in 1985. A film wrapped in elegance and restraint. Beneath the sweeping landscapes and composed surfaces lived a private devastation. As Corinne Blixen, she allowed her own memories of love and loss to rise just enough to be felt, never announced. The heartbreak was controlled, disciplined, and devastating precisely because of what it refused to show. Even roles that appeared lighter or more powerful bore the imprint of accumulated sacrifice. Years later, in The Devil Wears Prada, her icy authority concealed a profound solitude. To maintain that distance, she isolated herself from the cast, drawing on decades of restraint, pressure, and emotional withholding. Co-stars sensed it immediately, the sorrow beneath the steel dot in The Iron Lady. Confronting decline and erasure, she faced a fear that felt uncomfortably close. The role unsettled her. It felt like a mirror held too near. In the years that followed, her own life echoed that unease. Fewer appearances, more privacy, a gradual narrowing of the world. None of these performances were isolated achievements. They were part of a long negotiation between art and endurance. Each demanded something personal. Each left a mark. For Meryl Streep, greatness was never effortless. It was cumulative, built from grief, memory, and a willingness to stay present even when it hurt. She was already respected, her name spoken with reverence across stages and sets. When love arrived in a form that would permanently reshape her life. In 1976, during a Shakespeare production, she met John Cazale. His brilliance was fragile, his presence haunted. He was older, deeply private, carrying burdens he rarely named. She fell completely. Their life together unfolded quietly. Small apartments, scripts scattered across floors, long nights fueled by hope and exhaustion. They did not plan for permanence. They lived intensely in the present, and that was enough. The diagnosis arrived without mercy. Terminal lung cancer, already advanced. She was 27. Her career was accelerating. Doors were opening everywhere. She chose him. She moved in, attended treatments, carried him when he could no longer walk. When pain stole his voice, she sat in silence and learned what devotion looks like without words. During the Deer Hunter, she fought to keep him working, negotiating schedules, protecting his dignity. As his body failed, she barely left the hospital, sleeping in chairs, eating little, holding his hand through nights that seemed endless. On March 12, 1978, he died at 42. She was there for his final breath. The grief that followed was not loud. It was blinding. It hollowed her out and taught her a truth she would never forget. Love does not prepare you for loss. It makes it unbearable. 6 months later, she married sculptor John Cazale, a longtime friend who had helped her survive the aftermath. To outsiders, it seemed sudden. To her, it was survival. She rarely spoke publicly about John, but when she did, her voice changed. The pain, she said, never left. It simply learned how to stay quiet. That loss lived on in her work, giving it a depth only real suffering can shape. She never exploited it. She carried it privately, allowing it to inform her art without defining her publicly. With John Cazale, she built a life deliberately removed from spectacle. 4 children, a secluded home, ordinary routines that offered grounding after chaos. For decades, their marriage appeared unshakable, defined by privacy and restraint. At home, she was not an icon. She was a mother, present in small moments that never reached headlines. When the world later learned they had been separated for years, there were no explanations, no public unraveling, only dignity. She continued forward, wearing her wedding ring not as denial, but as acknowledgement of what once sheltered her. Hollywood, meanwhile, remained unforgiving. Praise was often edged with envy. Dismissals from peers cut quietly. False accusations spread faster than truth. She corrected the record once and moved on. Silence, again, was her defense. She understood early that dignity, once broken, cannot be reclaimed. Greatness, she learned, is often solitary. To be celebrated by millions and questioned by peers is a peculiar loneliness. Still she worked. Still she gave. Endurance became her language. Today, she lives more quietly. Wealth serves not as display, but as protection. Homes chosen for peace. Philanthropy practiced without spectacle. She supports education, women's history, and artists too often erased. Her generosity is personal, restrained, and deliberate. She does not chase youth. She honors the body that carried her through decades of expectation and loss. She chooses projects sparingly, mentors quietly, and prepares a legacy rooted in meaning rather than myth. The world calls her a legend. She has always been something more human, a woman who endured invisibility, grief, judgment, and still chose empathy. That is her true achievement. Comment 76 are right. R.I.P. Meryl Streep to honor them. Asterisk time has a way of revealing what applause cannot. As the decades unfolded, Meryl Streep's life narrowed not in possibility, but in noise. The crowds remained. The reverence did not fade. Yet she began to move through the world with a quieter gait, carrying the accumulated weight of years that demanded everything and returned very little peace. Fame never softened into comfort. It sharpened awareness. Every room grew louder, every silence more deliberate. She learned that longevity is not about endurance alone, but about discernment. Which roles deserve the remaining pieces of your heart? Which moments are worth the cost? She stopped proving herself long ago, yet the proving never stopped around her. Expectations hardened into assumptions. Excellence became obligation, and still she arrived prepared, not because she had to, but because craft to her was a form of respect. Criticism, even after decades of dominance, did not disappear. It changed shape. When voices from within her own industry questioned her style, her choices, or her presence, she absorbed it without spectacle. When comparisons followed her like a shadow, she did not step out of the light. She stood still and let the shadow pass. Dignity was never a performance. It was a decision renewed daily. Accusations surfaced, spread, hardened into rumor. She corrected falsehoods once, plainly, without flourish, and then returned to work. The noise lingered. It always does. What people rarely understand is how exhausting restraint can be. To remain composed while truth is bent. To keep working while your motives are questioned. To stay generous in a world that profits from fracture. Behind closed doors, the cost accumulated. Long corridors after curtain calls. Dressing rooms emptied of applause. The echo of ovations fading into something colder. Greatness, she learned, is not a shield. It is a height, and heights are lonely. Yet even in that solitude, she never allowed bitterness to calcify. She chose empathy repeatedly, even when empathy was not returned. She remembered what it felt like to be unseen. She remembered the quiet child behind glasses, the young woman fading at the edges, the artist doubting her place. That memory kept her grounded. It kept her human dot as the industry shifted around her. Chasing novelty and speed, she slowed deliberately. She declined what did not ask enough of her soul. She accepted work that carried weight rather than volume. When she appeared, it was with intention. When she spoke, it was measured. She had nothing left to prove, yet everything left to protect. Her presence in later projects reminded audiences that mastery does not shout. It settles. It commands attention without asking for it. Even a glance carried decades of understanding. Even stillness felt deliberate. Viewers leaned in not because of spectacle, but because truth was present again. At home, life continued in quieter rituals. Mornings without schedules. Evenings without scripts. The house in Connecticut breathing with absence and memory. Children grown, carrying fragments of her discipline and creativity into their own paths. She supported them without directing, loved them without display. She understood too well the cost of pressure. When separation from Doan Gummer became public knowledge, it arrived stripped of drama. Years had already passed. Lives had already adjusted. The world discovered what she had been living with silently. She did not explain. She did not justify. Some endings do not need witnesses. They only need space. Physically, she refused the illusion of permanence. She did not chase erasure of age. She honored it. The lines on her face were not flaws to be corrected, but records of endurance. Each one earned, each one carried. She moved more slowly, read more deeply, listened longer. Time, once an enemy, became an ally. The grief she carried never vanished. John Cazale remained present in quiet ways, in memory, in work, in the understanding that love can be brief and still eternal, that some losses shape a lifetime. She did not speak of it often, but it lived beneath everything she did. A steady undercurrent, never dramatized, never denied. Her wealth, often discussed by others, was never her measure. Money to her was not victory. It was insulation, privacy purchased inch by inch, freedom secured after decades of scrutiny, homes chosen for stillness rather than display, land that absorbed sound, walls that held silence, places where she could be no one at all. She gave generously, often without attribution, education, history, opportunities for women who had been told their time had passed. She understood erasure. She refused to participate in it. Her philanthropy did not announce itself. It moved quietly, like everything she valued. As she entered her 70s, the narrative around her shifted again. Not decline, but reflection. Not farewell, but distillation. Each appearance felt intentional. Each role chosen with care. She mentored without hierarchy, encouraged without claiming credit, prepared not an empire, but a closing of circles. Legacy for her was never about monuments. It was about resonance. What remains after the voice quiets? What survives when the lights dim? Empathy, discipline, truth. These were the things she believed endured. Music. The world continues to call her a legend, a goddess, an untouchable standard. She has always resisted those labels. They distance. They simplify. She has lived a life too complex, too fractured, too human for myth. What she represents is not perfection, but perseverance. Not brilliance alone, but courage sustained over time. She rose from being unseen. She endured loss that never loosened its grip. She carried expectations that never softened. And still, she chose generosity. She chose restraint. She chose to keep showing up. That is the story beneath the accolades. Not a fairy tale, not a triumph without cost, but a life lived with intention, discipline, and empathy in a world that rarely rewards those qualities for long. Comment: 76 are right, rip Meryl Streep to honor them. There's a moment in every long life when movement slows enough for memory to catch up. For Meryl Streep, that moment did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded gradually, almost imperceptibly, as decades of intensity gave way to something more fragile and more honest. The work continued, but the urgency softened. The need to prove dissolved. What remained was a deep attentiveness to meaning. She had spent a lifetime inhabiting other lives, carrying histories not her own, shouldering griefs scripted yet deeply personal. Over time, those lives layered within her, leaving traces. Not wounds exactly, but impressions that shaped how she saw the world. She no longer rushed toward projects. She waited for them to arrive with purpose. When she appeared on screen in later years, audiences felt the difference immediately. There was a gravity that could not be manufactured, a patience that allowed silence to speak. She no longer filled space. She shaped it. Even when the role was small, the presence lingered. It was the kind of authority that comes only from having nothing left to hide. Off screen, her days grew quieter. She retreated further into the rhythms of ordinary life. Reading became ritual. Walking the land around her home became meditation. She listened more than she spoke. The noise of the industry faded into distance, replaced by birdsong, wind through trees. The subtle comfort of routines that asked nothing in return. The separation from Doan Gummer, though never dramatized, marked a private shift. After decades of shared life, distance settled in. Not with bitterness, but with acceptance. Some bonds change shape rather than break. Some love survives without proximity. She understood that better than most. She carried that understanding into how she spoke of partnership, of devotion, of endurance. There were no declarations, only respect, only space, only silence where noise might have drawn attention. Her children, now adults, moved through their own creative lives. She watched from the margins, offering support without interference. She had learned too early the danger of being unseen, and too late the weight of being overexposed. For them, she chose balance, presence without pressure, guidance without control. Grandchildren brought a different kind of joy, lighter, less burdened by expectation. With them, she was not an icon or a standard. She was simply there, laughing softly, listening closely, allowing herself moments of ease she had once denied. The public continued to analyze her choices, her appearances, her silence. Some mistook quiet for withdrawal. Others mistook restraint for mystery. Few understood that silence had always been her language. From childhood, it had been how she survived. Now, it was how she protected what remained. She did not write a memoir. She did not tour her pain. She did not reframe her life for consumption. She let the work stand. She let absence speak. For an industry built on exposure, this refusal felt almost radical. As awards accumulated, she accepted them with grace but without attachment. Recognition had long ceased to define her. Applause was appreciated, then released. She knew too well how fleeting it was. What mattered more was integrity. Whether the work had been honest, whether it had served something beyond ego. In conversations with younger artists, she spoke less about success and more about survival, about boundaries, about listening to the body when it whispers before it screams, about the danger of confusing visibility with value. These were lessons earned, not theorized. Physically, she embraced change. She did not disguise age. She carried it openly, allowing it to inform rather than diminish her presence. The industry noticed. So did audiences. There was relief in seeing a woman remain powerful without apology. There was permission in her refusal to vanish or pretend. She chose roles that reflected that reality. Characters shaped by time, by memory, by loss. Women who carried histories in their posture and their pauses and the way they spoke less and meant more. These performances did not demand attention. They commanded it quietly. Her philanthropy continued with the same restraint that defined her life. She gave without spectacle, supported causes aligned with memory, education, and opportunity. Women whose stories might otherwise be lost. Artists who needed time rather than noise. She understood that real change rarely announces itself. At home, the rooms felt larger with absence. Yet there was peace in that spaciousness. Grief, once overwhelming, had settled into something gentler. Not gone, but integrated. A companion rather than an enemy. She allowed herself to sit with it without urgency. John Cazale remained part of that interior landscape. Not as tragedy, but as love remembered without distortion. She did not romanticize the pain. She honored the bond. It informed her understanding of devotion, of presence, of what it means to stay when leaving would be easier. That understanding shaped everything she touched. It was visible in her work, audible in her silences, felt in the way audiences leaned forward, sensing something unspoken but real. As years continued, the question was no longer what she would achieve, but what she would leave behind. She answered that not with declarations, but with choices. Fewer appearances, deeper commitments, a narrowing that clarified rather than diminished. She was no longer interested in expansion. She was interested in meaning, in resonance, in ensuring that what remained carried weight. The world often demands that legends explain themselves. She declined. Explanation, she knew, rarely satisfies. Presence does. And presence, even now, remains her quiet gift. She stands not at the end of a story, but within its final movements. Still attentive, still grounded, still choosing empathy in a culture that often rewards spectacle instead. Comment 76 or write R.I.P. Meryl Streep to honor them. Asterisk, asterisk in the later chapters of her life. What became most visible was not decline but clarity. The relentless striving that once defined her days gave way to something steadier, almost meditative. Meryl Streep no longer moved against time. She moved with it. Years of carrying expectation, grief, and excellence had taught her that survival is not always about resistance. Sometimes it is about release. She understood now what she could not have known as a child fading into the background, or as a young actress fighting to be taken seriously. That worth does not arrive through validation. It is discovered slowly, often painfully, through endurance. Through staying present when everything inside wants to disappear. Her career, viewed from a distance, appears seamless. A continuous line of achievement, recognition, and mastery. But she knows the fractures beneath that surface. The moments of doubt. The nights of exhaustion. The roles that demanded more than they returned. She remembers the cost of each step forward. That memory keeps her humble. When people speak of her now, they often use absolutes: greatest, unmatched, iconic. She accepts these words politely, then lets them go. Labels were never her aim. Connection was. Truth was. To reach across a screen and leave someone changed, even unsettled, was always the purpose. She has lived long enough to watch generations rise behind her. To see styles shift, values bend, attention fragment. Through it all, she remained anchored to craft. Not trends, not urgency, craft. The slow discipline of listening, observing, and honoring complexity. She taught by example more than instruction. Young actors still speak of her presence with reverence. Not because she dominates space, but because she respects it. She arrives prepared. She listens fully. She treats each moment as shared ground rather than territory to conquer. That generosity, rare in any field, is perhaps her most lasting influence. Her days now are shaped by choice rather than demand. She chooses when to engage and when to retreat. She chooses silence without apology. She chooses projects that resonate rather than impress. She chooses to live in a way that feels proportionate to what remains. In her home, time stretches gently. The past does not intrude as violently as it once did. Loss has softened into memory. Grief has become something she carries rather than something that carries her. There is space now to breathe without bracing. She reflects often on empathy, not as an abstract virtue, but as a lived practice. Empathy shaped her performances because it shaped her life. To know what it means to be unseen. To know the ache of loving deeply and losing completely. To know the exhaustion of being judged and the discipline required to remain kind anyway. These experiences were never separate from her work. They were its foundation. She understands now that her story will be told with or without her voice. That narratives will be simplified, moments highlighted, complexity smoothed. She does not fight this. Control was never the goal. Integrity was. Her legacy is not contained in awards or records, though those remain. It lives in the way audiences still fall silent when she appears. In the way other actors recalibrate their own standards after watching her work. In the permission she gave women to age without disappearing, to be powerful without apology, to be complex without explanation. She does not speak often about the future. The future, she knows, is uncertain for everyone. What she tends instead is the present. The relationships that matter. The causes that endure. The quiet rituals that keep her grounded. There is a particular dignity in how she has lived through contradiction. Celebrated yet private. Powerful yet restrained. visible yet guarded. She never resolved these tensions. She carried them. That carrying shaped her voice, her posture, her gaze. It is why her performances feel inhabited rather than displayed. She once said that the great gift of being human is empathy. That belief was not rhetorical. It guided her choices. It anchored her endurance. It remains the thread running through everything she has done. As the world continues to measure success in noise and speed, her life offers a different metric: depth over volume, longevity over immediacy, meaning over momentum. She did not outrun time. She walked with it, learning as she went. The final truth of her story is not triumph, though there was much of it. It is not suffering, though there was plenty. It is balance. The hard-won equilibrium between giving and preserving, between exposure and privacy, between devotion and survival. She stands now as living evidence that a life can be extraordinary without being loud. That strength can be quiet. That endurance can be graceful. And that empathy, practiced over decades, leaves a deeper mark than fame ever could. Meryl Streep did not simply become a legend. She remained a human being inside the legend, and that may be the rarest achievement of all. Comment 76 or rate Rip Meryl Streep to honor them.